At a time when celebrity weddings are often louder than the love itself, this one did the opposite. No grand announcements, no staged spectacle, no carefully crafted headlines. And yet, when news of Shin and Kim Woo-bin quietly sharing their wedding day began to surface, the world paused. Not because it was dramatic, but because it felt real. From the very beginning, this wedding resisted the expectations placed upon it. There was no intention to impress, to trend, or to be consumed with spectacle. Instead, it unfolded with a quiet confidence that suggested something far more deliberate. For Shin and Kim Woo-bin, the day was not designed for observation, but for meaning. In an industry where personal milestones are often shaped by external narratives, this ceremony stood apart by refusing to perform happiness. It did not attempt to prove anything to the world. There were no exaggerated gestures to signal success, no symbolic displays to reassure an audience. What mattered had already been lived, long before this moment arrived. The absence of performance was, in itself, a statement. It suggested that love does not require witnesses to be valid, and that commitment does not grow stronger under brighter lights. By choosing restraint over display, the wedding reframed celebration as something inward rather than outward, an acknowledgement of endurance, not an announcement of triumph. The presence of well-known figures did not transform the atmosphere into one of excitement or prestige. Instead, it deepened the sense of gravity. These were not guests invited to elevate the event's status, but individuals who carried shared memory and lived context. They arrived quietly, without the usual markers of celebrity attention, as if instinctively understanding the tone of the occasion. What distinguished this gathering was the role these figures played. They were not there to be admired or photographed, but to stand as witnesses to a journey already completed. Their significance lay not in recognition, but in remembrance. Each person represented a chapter, moments of uncertainty, of waiting, of hoping without guarantees. In this setting, fame became irrelevant. What mattered was proximity to the truth of the story. The wedding drew its emotional weight not from star power, but from shared history. These guests did not need explanations, speeches, or elaboration. Their presence alone affirmed that the path leading here was real, difficult, and worthy of respect. In that sense, they were not an audience, but a living record. This story offers a quiet but radical reframing of love. Rather than presenting devotion as sacrifice or endurance, it portrays love as a conscious, repeated choice, one made without calculation. There's no language of debt or obligation, no sense that staying required heroism. Instead, remaining present is shown as something natural, even unremarkable to those living it. What makes this portrayal powerful is its refusal to dramatize loyalty. There is no tally of what was given up, no emphasis on what was endured. The narrative suggests that true commitment does not measure its worth by hardship, nor does it seek recognition for persistence. It simply continues. This redefinition resonates because it feels honest. Many people understand that the deepest bonds are not maintained through grand gestures, but through ordinary consistency. By focusing on staying without keeping score, the story removes the performance from love and replaces it with steadiness. In doing so, it challenges the idea that devotion must be proven, reminding us that the most meaningful choices are often the quietest ones. Silence played a central role in this ceremony, not as absence, but as intention, where many celebrations rely on sound, movement, and visual cues to generate emotion. This one allowed space to do the work. Pauses were not hurried. Stillness was not awkward. The lack of spectacle invited attention rather than distraction. In that quiet, emotion was not directed but discovered. There was no moment engineered for reaction, no signal telling guests when to respond. Instead, everyone present seemed to sense when to remain still, when to lower their gaze, when to simply observe. This collective restraint created an atmosphere of mutual respect. By resisting spectacle, the ceremony allowed meaning to surface organically. Silence became a shared language, communicating understanding more effectively than words. It acknowledged that some moments lose their significance when forced into display. In choosing this approach, the wedding honored vulnerability and sincerity. It reminded everyone present that not all milestones are meant to be amplified. Some are meant to be held carefully, protected by quiet rather than noise. Although rooted in a specific place and culture, the emotional core of this story crossed borders effortlessly. Audiences across continents responded not because they shared the same industry or background, but because they recognized the emotions beneath the surface: uncertainty, patience, presence. These experiences require no translation. The story resonated internationally because it avoided exaggeration. It did not promise perfect outcomes or idealized endings. Instead, it acknowledged fragility while affirming connection. In doing so, it reflected a form of love that feels familiar to many, regardless of geography. For viewers in different parts of the world, the narrative offered reassurance rather than escape. It suggested that meaningful relationships are not defined by dramatic turning points, but by how people remain steady when clarity is absent. This universality allowed the story to move beyond cultural curiosity and become something personal. It was not about understanding a celebrity couple, but about recognizing a shared human truth, that quiet commitment is often what carries us through uncertainty. Long after the details faded, what lingered was a feeling rather than an image. This story stayed with people because it did not demand a reaction. It did not aim to excite or overwhelm. Instead, it allowed viewers to sit with their own reflections, creating space for personal meaning to emerge. Many found themselves thinking not about the wedding itself, but about moments in their own lives, times of waiting, of staying, of choosing presence without assurance. The narrative's restraint invited introspection rather than commentary. It did not tell audiences what to feel, which made the emotions more enduring. In a media landscape driven by immediacy, this story's impact lay in its slowness. It offered calm in place of stimulation, depth instead of novelty. By doing so, it earned attention rather than demanding it. People remembered it because it respected their emotional intelligence, trusting that sincerity, when left undisturbed, has the power to remain long after the screen goes dark. This was never just a wedding. It was a reminder that presence matters, that patience has its own quiet power, and that the most enduring love stories are often the ones that unfold away from the spotlight. If stories like this move you, stories that focus on depth, humanity, and quiet strength, please consider subscribing to Update X 124H. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful narratives that go beyond the headlines. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with Update X 124H for more inspiring stories from across the world.